Great. This is Zigmund with the Zigmund Reichenbach Show, episode 3. We unfortunately missed you guys last week. We're happy to have you back here today to talk about all the articles of the week and the various philosophical, political subjects that are most definitely worth talking about. If you'd like to follow along with us, you can go to zigmundereichenbach.com. Check out and subscribe to the email articles there, and that will certainly be a great way to really get involved in the fight, because the fight is not just a pure grassroots knock doors election thing. That the fight is really in our ideas and in our hearts and minds. And if we're not willing to arm ourselves with the best, most up-to-date knowledge, then we are sure to fall behind, as we have, most likely done for the last 100 years. But to jump right to it, the show that we have, or the first article or point of discussion that we have here, is language is capitalism, in which I make the case that capitalism is fundamentally rooted in our language, that our love of exchange and the love of trades and goods is essential to who we are as people. And that's why socialists hate language, and that's why they hate free speech, because to them that's a natural market exchange that undermines the socialistic worldview. But we got our great guest Christian here, who's also something of a philosopher himself. Christian, what do you think about this idea that our language is inherently capitalistic, and as such, socialists want to go out of the way to stop free speech?
I think that our language's function most certainly aligns to that of capitalism's. I don't think that okay, it's like a chicken and egg thing, except we know who came first, right? We know that language came first. Capitalism developed out of that. And I think that it's good to keep at capitalism, at least in the economic domain, for all practical intents and purposes, and to recognize this relationship with language as being one of an outgrowth, right, as opposed to anything else, right? But in the same sense that everything is ideas or value exchange. Even socialists, when they talk about their ideas, are engaging in an ideas and values exchange. And I don't even think they would deny that. What they would deny is that ideas and values exchange should be geared towards a system based on a certain kind of profit. They'll probably think the ideas and values exchange should be based on a system geared towards equality, social equality for all, whatever that abstraction might mean. So I think that every ideology is predicated on some kind of ideas and value exchange, at least at the start. And those ideologies may not develop into that, right? For example, even Nazism was based on an ideas and values exchange, even if it was within the party, and eventually that developed into a totalitarian dictatorship. So that's just the nature of language itself. So I see your point. I think functionally that they can be similar, but everything.
Yeah, no, but what I'm arguing though is that because that function is inherently capitalistic, therefore we have a natural orientation and proclivity to want to celebrate and like capitalism, at least if we like language and we like talking to people, because that is the nature of language. And really, what I'm also arguing here is that in socialism, there really is no speech, or socialism, communism, any regime based on this equalitarian politics. There's just people mouthing government catechisms while privately grousing about the tyrannical regime that they live under. That's not really free speech, right?
No. I'm not saying there's free speech. What I'm saying is there's discussion and there's values exchanges. So I'm saying functionally, language generally in capitalism can operate in the same way. Functionally, they certainly can. But I can give you several examples of language being used to exchange values and ideas that does not go towards a capitalistic extent. And that's still a use of language, not a perversion of language. Right. But that's still a use of language. No, so I wouldn't say language is inherently capitalistic.
Yes.
I would say language is based on exchange, and capitalism is a form of exchange, perhaps the most moral form of exchange and the only acceptable form of exchange, but it is a form of exchange.
Yeah, no, that's right. I just think there's some kind of perversion in the process that really people are naturally driven towards capitalism just on the basis of language in and of itself. And then some kind of moral or spiritual or perhaps even linguistic perversion happens such that they turn against that, or they're maybe able to profit off of being anti-free speech, right? That's typically how many politicians operate and work. Is they've discovered the fact, kind of like Nietzsche's priest class in genealogy of morals, I think it is, that they are able to profit by espousing a certain sort of morality. But really, in their ideal world, in the ideal socialist world, there would be nothing to talk about anyhow, because people are already equal. And therefore, having resolved and addressed all the world's problems, there would be no need for communication fundamentally. And I think that's why they're really targeting speech, because they want a silent world that people can't resist and get involved in the capitalistic exchange ideas, right?
Sure. Makes sense to me. Sure.
Yeah. So, I argue that socialists want to eliminate this righteous sense of dignity and liberty by destroying capitalism through destroying free speech. In their mind, a silent world is a socialistic world. I do believe that is indeed the case, and I think that's why it's imperative and essential and important that we do more speaking than ever before. That's why we started this podcast, to further open the barriers to the free exchange of ideas. And so from there, I really thought about, well, okay, so people think that contemporary politics is so divisive, and things are so that division is a function of intense competition between the two-party system. And I really don't believe it. I don't think that is indeed the case. And one reason why I say that that's not the case is because if you look at the worldview in leftist politics, it is inherently divisive in and of itself. And that kind of attitude they project outward to the world, such that it makes it look like there's division when there's not. Or alternatively, it seems like the competition that they are able to scapegoat the competition between two parties as being actual division, when in reality it's their worldview that is inherently divisive. They're creating social tension by ignoring the all-inclusive and supremely tolerant middle class, by just living in a binary world of haves and have-nots. And these people are saying that they're post-Platonic, they're post-binary. Well, yeah, right. And so in the article, left isn't responsible for political division. I make that case, and I wanted to ask Christian, do you think it's the case that contemporary division is really a function of competition between two parties, or do you think it's more likely to be the case that what's being called division is a byproduct of the leftist worldview that frames things in the world of haves and have-nots?
Well, certainly general leftist worldviews are divisive, or at least they divide people into certain groups and categories. That goes without saying. Whether it's going to be communist Marxists that divide people into the proletariat and bourgeoisie, whether it's going to be modern day progressives, which take a page from that playbook and divide folks into people who need equity, people who don't need equity, the privileged and non-privileged. Regardless of what it's going to be, yes, you have that sort of division there. But I think when people say division these days, they mean the sort of bitter enmity that a lot of people in the political world are enshrined in. And really, that's not, I agree with you, it's not a byproduct of the two-party system whatsoever. The two-party system is a byproduct of it, so to speak. It stems from differences in deeply held opinions. And I like to say this, even the founders of these United States were divided. John Dickinson, one of the most prolific founder of any of the founders, he refused to sign the Declaration of Independence, because he didn't believe in violent usurpation, and he knew that's what the other founders wanted. There were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, some of whom also wouldn't sign the new Constitution because they, particularly the Anti-Federalists, because they didn't want anything to do with how it came out. That was division. They screamed, they shouted, and even after the nation was established, you had cases like Marbury versus Madison, which kind of underlies the division between a lot of the people who helped found the country as well. So division has always been around in the country. It has actually gotten much better. It is not as bad as it used to be. And I think that the fact that people use division as a sort of political argument just shows their ignorance of history and their inability to grapple with the fact that we all have differences. And so long as we possess individual minds and wills, we shall always have differences. And from those differences, the fire of those differences, rather, was birthed the American experiment. So I think, Zygmunt, we ought to see division as a good thing, not a bad thing. And we ought to see enmity as the bad thing.
Well, I think it would certainly depend on what kind of division we mean here. I mean, if
Right.
if we are viewing things from the binary division of the leftist, where there's groups of haves and have-nots, and then there's a class, a wholly divine class of progressive managers that exist outside that realm, that only they can mediate the problems between those two, then that's not really a helpful division, because that's no remedy. Perhaps we're really thinking about tension or maybe differences in opinion that create a productive tension. But I think I generally agree with your point, because I think that well, I don't think unity in and of itself is a great thing. Look at nations that, and actually the United States is only united insofar as it comes from the many through one. Okay, it's not from the one comes many. That it's an individualistic sense of unity. But look at the nations that are purely united, like China. Would that total unity be a great thing? I mean, it really seems like people are using this notion of division to kind of scapegoat things, right?
Yeah, it's not purely united. It just has the artificial facade as that. I mean, there are plenty of folks in China that have and that are apathetic towards the Politburo's goals, and others who are absolutely hateful of them, but they're being oppressed and persecuted, and they can't say anything. And yeah, I mean, but I get what you're saying. It does seem as if there is a high level of social cohesion over there, but in all reality, that does nothing but breed morally undesirable circumstances. So I agree with you entirely. I do.
Well, but moreover, I think the left is blaming this division on capitalism, that capitalism tears people apart. And it's like, well, actually, capitalism creates a tolerant middle class that operating under the profit motive has no desire or reason to exclude anybody. That's a beautiful thing about profit, is that if you're really about profit, which a lot of companies aren't today, and that's not a fault of capitalism. That's probably the fault of the socialist ideology that their founders are supporting. But if you're operating under the profit motive, you have no incentive to be intolerant. In fact, most of the middle class is not intolerant because they have the means and preoccupation to not need to be divisive. There's really no need for that. And so part of what this article is suggesting is that their worldview, which is, again, fundamentally divisive in and of itself, everything is framed that way, where there is no real unity, and only the holy utopians can usher in any false sense of unity, that they're projecting that onto capitalism when it's a function of their very belief system.
Sure. Right. Sure. Yeah.
And I think, well, and I think it's important for people to know that, Christian, because then people can understand that the root of the problem is not capitalism or the exchange of ideas. It's not a free speech problem. It's choosing to believe the world is irreparably damned through this binary division. And so I was thinking about that, and that led me to kind of wonder about, well, okay, I know that Marx always celebrated freedom. Is freedom really the virtue that the middle class should be aiming for? And, perhaps under tyrannical regimes, or under monarchies, or even under those sort of autocracies that both Lenin and Marx himself dealt with, perhaps a call for freedom is useful in toppling those tyrannical regimes. But
Mhm.
really, I thought the broader point was independence, and that the goal of all concerned members of the middle class should be independence, not freedom. So today, you have so many young kids who are going into hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, or the total sum is like billions of dollars. And they're saying that they're fighting for freedom and that they love freedom. And then really, that means to operate without restraint. And so the distinction between independence and freedom, I'm arguing, is crucial to liberty. That if we don't better understand that distinction, then people are going to head down the wrong path. For example, those that live free without restriction or limitation live sloppy lives characterized by overindulgence, food, drink, and drugs. And if you don't believe that, go back to the photos and all the stuff that was going on in the 60s and 70s. Those people were free, man. They were really free. And really what that meant is they marched around outside without taking showers and drank too much, ate too much. And that's not really a virtuous life, is it, Christian?
Look, I think you're half right. Freedom is freedom from restraint, but it's not freedom from self-restraint. It's
Mm,
freedom from external restraint. And
mm,
and a lot of times people, and this is like the dispute between liberty and license. Okay, you're free, and not only are you free from that, freedom from allows you to do anything you want to. That's license. But freedom from restraint is not license to do whatever, because you still are under a system. If you are under a true system of freedom, you're under a system of moral obligation,
mm.
which does make you accountable to other people for certain things that you do. So with freedom comes the duty to be self-restrained. So
Mm.
I think that that's what we have to emphasize. Okay,
Well,
the external restraint is largely gone unless these few factors are in play. But the self-restraint, if you want to really keep your ability to even exercise your freedom, must be
right.
emphasized. And that's what any natural law person who is
No,
in their
right.
right mind would tell you that.
So so here's what I made the case that independence is a concept that naturally suggests empowerment through responsible restraint. And its very name implies a perpetual vigilance against self-decline and carelessness. And it further suggests the successful overcoming of life's many financial, moral, and spiritual obstacles. Right. And so what I'm suggesting is that the what you're calling freedom is what I'm saying is independence. That you have worked through responsible restraint, you now have the liberty to do things how you want, but only after much hard work. And I think if people thought about earning their own independence, then maybe they would be inclined to do less drinking and partying and some of the nonsense that really helps take people down the wrong path. Instead, if they thought, well, I can earn my independence and more responsibly and more healthily with greater gratitude, enjoy and appreciate life, then maybe people would function differently, right?
sure, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, yeah, but I don't think there's a separation between freedom and independence, as you so claim it, as you so describe it. There is a necessary symbiotic relationship between the two.
uh
So I think being
I
free
see what
from
you're saying.
restraint, right? Being free from restraint does not mean being free from self-restraint.
No, and then that can be true, but regardless, how people conceptualize freedom is not in a relationship to independence. At least
Okay,
that's not how most college students see it, right? That's
yeah,
that's why they
and
have all this.
that's and they're wrong.
Well,
They're-
no, I know that's what I'm trying to say here is that hey, this what you guys are calling freedom is just being sloppy and careless,
it's
and then
hedonism.
over time you're really not free if you don't. What you're
It's
calling free
hedonism.
doesn't lead to a good existential outcome, we'll say.
Yeah, it's
But
hedonism.
I mean, and moreover, the United States has the Declaration of Independence, not the Declaration of Freedom, right? We
Yeah,
are
it's kind of word.
declaring ourselves independent because we have earned
Yeah.
through restraint the right of separation.
Well, I'm not sure that was necessarily the origin of the word independence in that context, but I do get your point. I do get your point. People should be self-restrained if they want to actually have a coherent sense of freedom. I agree. No, yeah.
Well, I'm also saying that independence is the more responsible sounding concept. For example, Christian, if you were describing like a friend of yours and you said, "Oh, well, my friend's living free," or "My friend is a free person," people would be like, "What? So they live in a commune? Like they don't brush their teeth?
Yeah, well,
They don't
people
believe in
need
running
to
water?"
change. People need to change how they understand the word freedom
Yeah.
and align it with the term's proper meaning. Unfortunately, there are a lot of words that are tainted these days because they have been misused by hedonists, misappropriated by hedonists who still wanted to fit in a little bit, by using common
But that is
terminology.
indeed the philosopher's goal, to change and clarify those meanings to better correlate to reality, right?
Well, I think it's the philosopher's goal to try to understand what those words originally meant and the interconnected concepts to those words, and then to try to preserve those original meanings by making them clearer. And right now, you're right. You're correct about this. The term freedom is associated with a kind of a hedonism
Yes.
that is destructive to what the term actually means.
Yes.
I agree with you.
Yes.
I agree with you.
Yes.
And that's a
Yes.
problem.
And
It's a problem.
yeah. And so I guess I'll just go lastly with this bit here, that the same cannot. So I'm talking about free citizens here, and I said I mentioned the virtues of independence in the paragraph previous, and it says the same cannot be said of free citizens. Such freedom fighters inevitably do it, and everyone does, in the pursuit of an unattainable goal. The unattainable goal being the living without restraint. They burn out and rely on others in the state for therapeutic support. This is what Marx loved most about freedom. Marx loved freedom because it could be used to get the naive to fight for and love their own bondage through government help. And that's what I argue that people are doing now when they say, "Oh, we're fighting for freedom." Maybe it would be better if you fought for your own financial independence. And that way, nobody can tell you what to do, or you
I
can
agree.
fight for your kids' independence, right?
I agree. We have different ways of saying it, different
Yep.
terminology, but sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think Marx's ultimate goal is indeed freedom, and that's actually what you'll hear. You'll hear a lot of Marxists and socialists say, "Well, you guys are saying you conservative Republican guys are saying that you're for freedom." Well, that's what Marx wanted. He wanted to make sure that you could hunt and fish in the afternoon, you could drink coffee later. Marx wanted the same thing. So aren't you guys socialists? Well,
he wanted freedom from want. That's a different thing. He wanted freedom from want. He didn't want freedom from restraint. He actually wanted to use various levers of restraint to get that freedom from want.
Well, it's not just that, but it's also total independence of the individual. Or not, forgive me, I'm using my own word wrong in that case, but to live life without any restraint through unlimited abundance that the communist society could provide.
Well, he wanted people to not have want, the restraint of want, the restraint of having lack of resources. But I promise you, if you were some of the most prosperous in a society pre-Marx, once Marxist people took over, you would have a lot of restraint. Your property would be seized, everything about you would be divested and put into this idea of the community. So yeah, the Marxian vision of freedom is not any kind of freedom that I recognize as legitimate.
Well, and that's one of the pragmatic and political reasons to insist on a different subject or notion,
Yeah,
like independence, that I think more people could perhaps get behind it and better understand for clarity's sake. And then, lastly, in our last essay here, which is somewhat less philosophical than the other three, and I should have had a fifth one, but such is life, and sometimes we end up working. But in this one, we discuss deficit spending as the greatest threat to national security, and I do indeed believe that.
Yeah, me too.
For one reason at least, is that right now, because of the vast amount of national debt that we have accrued, we are unable to increase interest rates, because increasing those interest rates would thereby increase the vast amount of debt that we have.
Mm.
And so therefore, as a result of that, we have to continue to deal with inflation as a corollary or byproduct of this debt. Now, politicians and other clever people will come up with all these terms. Oh, it's transitory. Oh, there's unaccountable chip shortage. There's this and that. Well, no, that's really not true. You guys ran up too much debt, and you never discussed a real actionable solution. And one reason why, as I suggested here, is because that's not an issue that people can fundraise on. Instead, what's going on is, instead of taking this seriously as a nonpartisan issue, politicians are choosing to fundraise by fear mongering about China. Now, certainly our relationship to China isn't ideal, but on the other hand, they're ignoring perhaps a much more substantial issue in the national debt. And they're doing that because you can't write appeals letters saying, oh, we're going to tackle the national debt. We're going to take down the national debt. And I think that's a problem, right, Christian?
Oh yeah, of course. No. Well, the thing is, you could write letters to and do entire speeches about that too. But the problem is what's included in the national debt, the behemoth social entitlement programs, which are some of the most potent sacred cows of the American experiment. And if you begin talking about that, people are going to begin questioning. Okay, my benefits, my subsidies. For regular folks, it'll be their benefits. For businesses and corporations, lead my subsidies. And you'll have this sort of tsunami of political and social interests, perverse political and social interests, might I say, rising up to shut down whatever you do if it is going to substantially reduce the national debt. Now, things that wouldn't substantially reduce national debt, like just cutting $1 million here or $1 million there in some non-substantial program, are what a lot of politicians will talk about. But they won't actually talk about completely overhauling the tax code. They won't actually talk about eliminating corporate subsidies and tax rates. They don't actually talk about cutting down or privatizing Social Security and a lot of the healthcare changes in America. They don't actually talk about things that are, or cutting defense spending. Oh, they really won't talk about that. They'll cut it a little bit, like Barack Obama did, but you'll still have like almost the entire discretionary budget devoted to defense spending. So yes, it's a bunch of lip service because there are so many political and social interests staked in the subjects of the national debt. It's
Well,
concerning.
I also think, Christian, if politicians were to actually take on this issue of addressing the spending that's causing inflation, then they would have to admit that they are in some ways responsible for the vast amount
Sure.
of inflation, and that's a nonpartisan thing.
Yeah.
Both Republicans and Democrats agree to programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and that's one reason. That's one motivating factor behind why I'm writing, because I think for probably 100 years, Republicans didn't know what Republican values were. And then they didn't have a competing vision for America that was in any way compelling. And therefore, they just gave up. Democrats got a vast electoral advantage because of the New Deal. And not only did nobody know any better, but they also didn't have any counter understanding of how society should work and why we need to keep the federal government out and away from people. So, it's just a shame, because these people would really have to acknowledge responsibility. And instead of doing that, they can go on TV, they can write books, they can do all this other fundraising stuff. And I think I guess I'm not totally against fundraising, supporting free speech, as the Citizens United case says that these unlimited donations to vast campaigns are part of free speech. But on the other hand, it may really be the case that the politicians have to spend less time doing fundraising and more time talking to each other.
Yeah.
And they should be encouraged to do so for different reasons. One is that money does not win elections, just doesn't. I know that people who hate our country want to say, well, yeah, all the rich people bought their elections. No, that's not true. AOC didn't buy her election. She won because she had grassroots support. Bernie Sanders didn't buy his election initially. He won grassroots support. Dave Bratt won against the majority speaker, Eric Cantor, not because he had more money, but because he had a more appealing plan. So I'm just concerned, Christian, that maybe this preoccupation with fundraising is a perverse incentive that stops politicians from taking this issue seriously. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, makes sense to me. Yeah. But the politicians do talk to each other all the time, though.
Yes.
The idea that they don't talk to each other is a little bit absurd. I mean, the whips of both parties talk to their members, the leaders of both parties, and each respective chamber talk to their members as well. It's not a matter of them not focusing on money and talking to each other that's going to change things. It's a matter of them changing the values that are nested in their heart and and how they view these issues. Because not every politician views national debt as a serious issue. A lot of them view the national debt as a natural evil of having a country that is trying to provide for its citizens. And that is a value statement as much as it is anything else. And when a bunch of people collaborating under the same roof, Capitol Hill, with the same kind of values in that respect, at least, you're not going to have a change until you get different people in the room with different values.
Yeah, no, that's right. So what do you think the solution is here? Like, would it be the case that members of Congress should do you think it would be the case that if members of Congress just voluntarily rejected less spending and that their constituents insisted upon people spending less time on TV and less time at fundraisers and more time addressing the national debt, that would solve the problem? Or do you think there's something else missing there?
No, for as long as America keeps its entitlement culture, the national debt will continue to be a problem. It is at first it is a social problem before it's a political problem. It originated as a political problem, right? The social welfare state originated in the 30s with FDR and him, well, even before then. It really started with the progressive era. FDR ramped it up in the 30s. And now, however, it's become a social affliction because people are now used to their benefits. They're used to all of these programs, and living without them would give a lot of people this sort of illusion of unease and insecurity. I say the illusion because people quite literally pay into Social Security with their own money, comes out in taxes. If you had the same thing with the private program, how you can be cheaper, I don't know, but it's an illusion of insecurity. So it is now a social problem. It's now a social problem. So no, getting politicians to talk more or to focus more on the national debt will not change it if there are still a majority of Americans that want to preserve Social Security. No, it's not going to change anything.
Yeah, no, that's useful and good, and you're right. It is a social. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what came first. Perhaps attacking the problem on both fronts, both politically and socially, would do the most justice. I'm just not sure that people can go back to conceptualizing things that way.
That's the challenge.
Because somebody who's close to me, they work in they're a social worker, and what they told me was somebody told them that back when that institution was not captured by the government, that people had a lot more activities, there was a lot more fun, better care was provided. It was an overall better experience when it was a primarily religious institution. And now that there's government dollars, that has vastly changed things in ways that aren't good. And can people ever go back to believing that we can do those things privately? I don't think they can. That's why in the past, Christian, I mentioned that people have to set up that parallel society, right? That people have to be committed to setting up a parallel but more locally state focused society, instead of maybe inadvertently buying into national culture through watching so much TV, through looking at engaging in all these big national pastimes, because that connection, I guess, is stopping people from addressing problems in their own community, right?
I don't think that it's worthless or useless to go ahead and try to change the cultural mindset around these issues, but
Yeah.
it's difficult. It's going to be very difficult. When someone's life is invested in a certain concept, it becomes almost an immovable force in their life. But I think that could have been said for any enduring cultural concept that was nestled in the hearts of men and that guided their decisions for a very long time that we eventually liberated ourselves from. For a good majority of human history, most human societies had rulers of some sort, had rulers who ruled by arbitrary whim or force by some sort. And most people could not conceptualize existing under a environment that was not like that. Then America came along. And of course, it was only a small minority of people in the colonies that rose up. But that small minority was enough to create a grand experiment which has spanned decades upon centuries past their time. It's going to take a small minority of people who have enough resources and enough wit and enough grit to break the cultural binds over the mind of so many Americans that tell them, yes, you do need the government to provide you everything that you need, health care, money for your retirement. It's going to take a small minority of people, but it can happen. If people are dedicated enough, it can happen. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right, Christian. Well, we're just about wrapping up today. We have a shorter show for you. It was about 38 minutes, but we will come back to you next week with the topics that I'm not totally certain about yet. You'll see as you get them in writing. I guess the next article I probably will write, though, Christian, is that I believe that the focus on national government and national pastimes and national things in general is taking away our capability or ability or desire to take care of our communities in ways that we can finally free ourselves from government. I think that's fundamentally and unequivocally true. I don't think that people realize that that would be the case because they didn't look at the philosophy, and when they finally did, it was largely because some economists talked about the perils of the fascist state, of big government, of German style communist groupthink governance. But what they didn't emphasize, because they were economists, and like all the other people in that time, is the principle of federalism and local and state control. I think a lot of that was overlooked, and it's been overlooked as a real solution to many of today's problems, in part because I think people like large national audiences because it's more profitable, which whatever. But on the other hand, it's really hurting and harming our communities and turning whole regions into dependence and many serfdoms of the government. So that's all we got for you today. It's been a good show. Make sure to go to ZigmundReichenbach.com to subscribe to our newsletters. So that way, not only can you better participate in these discussions, but you can be equipped to deal with to better understand our republic and to counter anything some of these. So what I would call collectivist is what I'm saying according to that article that I wrote some time ago. Make sure to get on there, share with your friends, and we will see you all next Sunday at our new time, which is 4:00. Any last words, Christian?
Thank you for having me, and I hope that people go ahead and subscribe and everything.
Great. Hey, it's been great, brother. And